Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the training field, her jaw set tight as she watched the other recruits file into formation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course, and she could already feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. Being the only woman in an elite special operations training program meant every move she made was scrutinized. Every mistake magnified, every success dismissed as luck. She had earned her place here through years of dedication, pushing her body beyond limits most people never dreamed of reaching. Her scores in the preliminary tests had been exceptional, her mental fortitude unquestionable. But none of that seemed to matter to the group of men who had made it their personal mission to see her fail. The ringleader was a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Bellamy, a former college football player who carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never been told no. He had gathered a small crew around him, men who shared his belief that women had no place in combat operations. They whispered when she passed, made crude jokes just loud enough for her to hear, and had started what they thought were subtle attempts to sabotage her training. During the morning drills, Sarah moved through the exercises with practiced precision. Her muscles burned as she scaled the rope wall, her fingers gripping the rough fiber with trained strength. She had spent months preparing for this program, studying not just the physical requirements, but the psychological warfare that came with it. She knew men like Bellamy existed in every corner of the military. She had prepared herself mentally for the challenge. What she hadn't expected was how coordinated their efforts would become. As the weeks progressed, the incidents escalated from verbal harassment to something more dangerous. Equipment would go missing from her locker. Her gear would be tampered with in small ways that could cause injury during exercises. During team drills, she would find herself isolated, no backup when protocols demanded it. The instructors either didn't notice or chose to look the other way. This was supposed to be about proving yourself under pressure, about showing you could handle anything the enemy might throw at you. Complaining would be seen as weakness, as an inability to cope with the demands of elite military service. Sarah had grown up in a military family. Her father had been a Marine, her grandfather had served in Vietnam, and her older brother was currently deployed overseas. She understood the culture, respected the traditions, but she also knew that what was happening to her went beyond acceptable standards. This wasn't about making her stronger. This was about breaking her down until she quit. One afternoon, during close-quarters combat training, Bellamy made his move. The drill was supposed to be controlled, a demonstration of hand-to-hand techniques under the supervision of their combat instructor. But as Sarah stepped onto the mat, she saw the look in Bellamy's eyes and knew something was different today. The instructor called for them to begin, and Bellamy came at her fast, harder than the drill required. Sarah deflected his first strike, her training kicking in automatically. But he pressed forward, using his size advantage to try to overwhelm her. She could hear his friends cheering him on from the sidelines, their voices creating a wall of hostile sound. Sarah blocked, parried, and moved. But Bellamy wasn't following the prescribed patterns. He was fighting for real, trying to hurt her, trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. She could feel her anger rising but kept it locked down. Emotion was a liability in combat. Her instructors had taught her that years ago. What Bellamy didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah's training went far deeper than the standard military curriculum. Before joining this program, she'd spent 2 years working with a retired Navy SEAL named James Morrison, a man who had seen combat in some of the world's most dangerous places. He had taken her under his wing, recognizing something in her that reminded him of the warriors he had served with. Morrison had taught her things that weren't in any manual, techniques that were born from real-world experience and the absolute necessity of survival. He had pushed her harder than any official instructor ever could, breaking her down and rebuilding her into something more capable, more dangerous, more focused than she had ever imagined possible. As Bellamy lunged forward again, Sarah made a decision. She was done being a victim. She was done letting these men dictate the terms of her existence here. It was time to show them exactly what she was capable of. She sidestepped his attack with fluid grace, her body moving with a precision that came from thousands of hours of practice. Before Bellamy could adjust, she was inside his guard. her strikes landing with calculated force on pressure points that sent shockwaves of pain through his nervous system. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was devastatingly effective. Bellamy stumbled backward, confusion and pain written across his face. Sarah didn't pursue. She simply reset her stance, her breathing calm and controlled, her eyes locked on his. The message was clear. She was not prey. She was a predator, and if he wanted to continue this game, he needed to understand the rules had just changed. The training yard fell silent. Even the instructor seemed momentarily stunned by the sudden shift in dynamics. Bellamy's friends stopped their cheering, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. For the first time since arriving at this program, Sarah felt the balance of power tilt in her direction, but she knew this was just the beginning. Men like Bellamy didn't learn from one lesson. They would regroup, they would plan, and they would come at her again with everything they had. And when they did, she would be ready. Because Sarah Chen wasn't just a soldier trying to earn her place. She was a weapon that had been forged in the fires of real combat training, taught by someone who understood what it truly meant to survive against impossible odds. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky as the drill resumed, but something fundamental had changed on that training field. Sarah had drawn a line, and everyone present knew that crossing it would come with consequences they weren't prepared to face. Asterisk. The incident on the training mat became the talk of the base within hours. Stories spread through the barracks, each retelling adding its own embellishments. But the core truth remained. Sarah Chen had taken down Marcus Bellamy with techniques nobody had seen before. Some of the other recruits looked at her with newfound respect. Others, particularly those in Bellamy's circle, saw it as a challenge that demanded a response. Sarah knew the real test was coming. As she sat in the mess hall that evening, eating her dinner in silence, she could feel the tension building like a storm, gathering strength over the ocean. Bellamy sat across the room with his crew, their heads bent together in conversation, occasionally glancing in her direction. She didn't need to hear their words to know they were planning something. The next phase of training involved night operations. Exercises designed to simulate real-world combat scenarios in low-visibility conditions. These drills were among the most dangerous in the program, requiring absolute trust between team members and flawless execution under pressure. It was exactly the kind of situation where accidents could happen, where someone could get hurt, and it would be written off as a training mishap. Sarah reported to the armory that evening to collect her gear. The equipment manager, a grizzled sergeant named Rodriguez, handed her a tactical vest and helmet, but as she inspected them, she noticed the straps had been loosened beyond proper adjustment. Small things, easily missed in the dark, but potentially fatal if she needed to move quickly or take cover. She adjusted everything carefully, double-checking each piece of equipment with the methodical attention James Morrison had drilled into her. Trust your gear, he had always said, but verify everything yourself. In combat, the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. The night exercise began at 2200 hours. The recruits were divided into two teams, attackers and defenders, with the objective being to secure a mock compound in complete darkness. Sarah found herself assigned to the attacking team, along with Bellamy and 3 of his closest associates. The assignment wasn't random. Someone had made sure they would be working together tonight as they moved through the darkness. Using night vision equipment to navigate the terrain, Sarah stayed alert to everything around her. The training area was designed to simulate an urban environment, with multiple buildings, narrow alleys, and countless places where an ambush could occur. The defenders would be waiting somewhere in that maze. But Sarah's biggest concern wasn't the opposing team. Bellamy took point. Leading them through the simulated streets with hand signals and whispered commands, Sarah moved in formation, keeping proper spacing, her weapon at ready position. But she could sense something wrong in the way the others were positioning themselves. They were boxing her in, restricting her movement options, creating a situation where she would have limited ability to react if something went wrong. They approached a narrow alley between 2 buildings, and Bellamy signaled for them to move through. Standard tactical doctrine would have them clear each side first, but Bellamy was pushing them forward too quickly, bypassing proper procedures. Sarah recognized the setup immediately. This was where they would make their move. As she entered the alley, two things happened simultaneously. The team members behind her suddenly hung back, leaving her exposed, while Bellamy and another recruit moved to block her exit from the front. In the same instant, she heard movement from the buildings on either side. This wasn't the defending team. These were Bellamy's people, positioned specifically for this moment. What they intended as an ambush became something else entirely when Sarah reacted. Instead of freezing or trying to retreat, she moved forward with explosive speed. Morrison had taught her that the best response to an ambush was aggressive action, moving through the kill zone rather than staying trapped in it. She closed the distance to Bellamy in 3 rapid steps, her movements so fast and unexpected that he barely had time to raise his hands. Sarah struck with precision, not wild or angry strikes, calculated blows designed to neutralize threats with minimum effort. Her elbow connected with Bellamy's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As he doubled over, she swept his legs, putting him on the ground in less than 2 seconds. The others converged, but Sarah was already moving. She used the narrow confines of the alley to her advantage, making it impossible for them to attack all at once. Morrison had spent months training her in close-quarters combat, teaching her how to use environment, angles, and timing to overcome superior numbers. The first man who reached her received a palm strike to the jaw that snapped his head back and sent him stumbling into the wall. The second tried to grab her from behind, but Sarah dropped her weight and twisted, using his own momentum to throw him over her hip. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. The remaining 2 hesitated, suddenly realizing this wasn't going as planned. Sarah didn't give them time to regroup. She pressed forward, her attacks flowing from one to the next, with a fluidity that came from countless hours of practice. These weren't the techniques taught in standard military combatives courses. These were real-world fighting methods, developed and refined by operators who had faced life-or-death situations in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. Within 30 seconds, all 5 men were on the ground, groaning in pain and gasping for breath. Sarah stood in the center of the alley, her breathing only slightly elevated, her stance ready for more if needed. But the fight was over. They had come at her with numbers and planning and surprise, and she had dismantled them with skills they couldn't comprehend. The sound of slow clapping echoed through the alley. Sarah spun, her body tensing, but relaxed slightly when she saw the combat instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Williams, emerging from the shadows. He had been watching the entire encounter, she realized. He had known what was planned and had positioned himself to observe. Williams approached, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a moment, Sarah thought she might face disciplinary action for fighting her fellow recruits. But then Williams spoke, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "Where did you learn to fight like that, Lieutenant Chen?" he asked, his eyes studying her carefully. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I had a good teacher, Gunny. Someone who understood what real combat looks like." Williams nodded slowly, then looked at the men sprawled across the alley. "Get up," he ordered them. "All of you are going to run 10 miles with full packs. Then you're going to write incident reports explaining how you ended up on your backs during a training exercise." He turned back to Sarah. "It's for you, Lieutenant. You're going to come with me. It seems we need to have a conversation about your training background and where exactly you fit in this program." As they walked away from the alley, leaving Bellamy and his crew to deal with the consequences of their actions, Sarah felt something shift. This wasn't victory, not yet, but it was progress. She had proven she couldn't be intimidated or overwhelmed. The question now was, what would come next? And whether the system would recognize her abilities or see them as a threat to the established order. Behind them, Bellamy pulled himself to his feet, shame and anger warring on his face. He had underestimated her completely, and that mistake had cost him more than just physical pain. It had cost him credibility and respect among the very people he had been trying to impress. And as he watched Sarah walk away with the instructor, he realized with growing dread that he had made an enemy far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Gunnery Sergeant Williams led Sarah to a small office building on the far side of the training complex, away from the barracks and main facilities. The room he brought her to was sparse, containing only a desk, a few chairs, and maps of various training zones pinned to the walls. He gestured for her to sit, then closed the door behind them. For a long moment, Williams said nothing. He studied her with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of soldiers pass through his programs, learning to separate the pretenders from the genuine warriors. Finally, he leaned against the desk and crossed his arms. "I've been running special operations training programs for 15 years, Williams began, his voice measured and thoughtful. "I've seen every type of recruit you can imagine. The ones who think they're tough because they played sports, the ones who come from military families and believe it's in their blood, the ones who watch too many movies and think they know what combat looks like." He paused, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "And then, very rarely, I see someone who actually knows what they're doing. Someone who's been trained by people who've been there, done the real work. Survived the situations that most people only read about in classified after-action reports." Sarah remained silent, waiting to see where this was going. She had learned from Morrison that sometimes the best response was to listen, to let the other person reveal their intentions before committing to a course of action. "James Morrison," Williams said. And Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the mention of her mentor's name. "He was one of the best operators I ever served with. Ran missions in places that don't officially exist. Did things that never made it into any official record. When he retired, a lot of people in the community wondered where all that knowledge and experience would go." Williams moved to the window, looking out at the dark training grounds. "I'm guessing he found someone worth passing it on to. The techniques you used tonight, those aren't standard military combatives. Those are SEAL close-quarters battle methods refined through actual combat experience. The kind of things we don't teach in programs like this because they're too effective. It's too dangerous for regular training environments." Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I sought out the best instruction I could find before applying to this program. I wanted to be prepared for whatever challenges I might face. If I've exceeded the normal training standards, I apologize, but I won't apologize for being prepared." Williams turned back to her, and to her surprise, he was almost smiling. "Lieutenant, you don't need to apologize for being competent. What you need to understand is that your presence here has created a situation that goes beyond the normal dynamics of a training program." He sat down across from her, his expression becoming more serious. "Those men who came after you tonight, they're not going to stop. You humiliated them, showed them up in front of their peers and their instructors. Men like Bellamy, they're not built to accept that kind of defeat. They're going to escalate, and next time they might not care about the consequences." Sarah had already reached the same conclusion. "What are you suggesting, Gunny? That I quit to make things easier for everyone?" "No," Williams said firmly. "What I'm suggesting is that we change the parameters of your training. You're beyond what this program can teach you in terms of combat skills. What you need now is the opportunity to demonstrate those skills in ways that can't be dismissed or undermined." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. Sarah opened it to find orders for a special training exercise, a joint operation with an active-duty SEAL team that was scheduled to take place in 2 weeks. "This is a rare opportunity," Williams explained. "Recruits at your level don't normally get to work directly with operational units. But I've made some calls, pulled in some favors from people who remember Morrison and respect what he represented. You're going to participate in a multi-day exercise that simulates a hostage rescue operation in hostile territory." Sarah looked up from the orders, understanding beginning to dawn. "And Bellamy's group?" "They'll be there too," Williams confirmed, "along with about 20 other recruits from various programs. But here's the key difference. The SEAL team running the exercise will be evaluating everyone's performance. Their assessments carry significant weight in determining who moves forward in the special operations pipeline and who gets reassigned." He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "This is your chance to prove yourself in a way that can't be disputed or dismissed. Not in some training yard scuffle, but in a complex operation where your skills and decision-making will be tested against real-world standards. The SEALs running this exercise don't care about politics or prejudices. They care about competence, about whether someone can do the job when lives are on the line." Sarah closed the folder, her mind already working through the implications. This was both an opportunity and a risk. If she performed well, it could establish her credibility beyond any doubt. But if she failed, or if Bellamy and his crew managed to sabotage her performance, it could end her chances of advancing in the special operations community. "There's something else you should know," Williams added. "The SEAL team leader for this exercise is Commander Jack Rains. He served with Morrison on multiple deployments. If Morrison trained you, Rains will recognize it in how you work, how you think, how you approach problems." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah threw herself into studying the exercise parameters, reviewing hostage rescue protocols, and physically conditioning herself for what she knew would be an exhausting test. She noticed that Bellamy and his group were also preparing, training together with an intensity that suggested they were taking this just as seriously as she was. The exercise was scheduled to take place at a remote training facility designed to replicate a small Middle Eastern town, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow streets, and civilian role-players who would complicate the scenario. The objective was straightforward: infiltrate the town, locate and extract 3 hostages being held by a hostile force, and exfiltrate without casualties. On the morning of the exercise, Sarah arrived at the briefing room to find it packed with recruits from various programs. The energy in the room was tense, competitive, everyone knowing that their performance over the next few days would have lasting consequences for their careers. Commander Rains entered, and the room immediately fell silent. He was a lean, weathered man in his early 40s. With the quiet confidence that came from years of operating in the world's most dangerous places, his eyes swept across the assembled recruits, pausing briefly on Sarah before moving on. "This exercise is designed to test you under conditions that approximate real combat operations," Rains began, his voice carrying authority without needing to be loud. "You will be divided into 4 teams. Each team will receive intelligence, develop a plan, and execute the mission. You will be evaluated on tactics, teamwork, decision-making under pressure, and your ability to adapt when things don't go as planned." He pulled up a map on the screen behind him, showing the layout of the target area. The hostile force in this scenario is well-trained and well-equipped. They will not make mistakes just to let you succeed. If you fail, people die. That's the scenario. Treat it as real, because the lessons you learn here might save lives someday when the stakes are actual, not simulated. As Rains outlined the parameters of the exercise, Sarah noticed something interesting. The team assignments had been carefully constructed to mix recruits from different programs, breaking up existing alliances and forcing people to work with strangers. She found herself assigned to Team 3, along with 6 other recruits she barely knew, and Marcus Bellamy was the team leader. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she saw his name on the roster. This was either a test or a setup, possibly both. Bellamy would have tactical authority over the team's decisions, which meant he could potentially use that authority to put her in dangerous positions or set her up to fail. But as she looked at Commander Rains, she saw something in his expression that made her pause. This wasn't random. The team assignments had been deliberate, designed to create exactly this kind of tension and challenge. The real test wasn't just about executing a mission. It was about whether people could overcome personal conflicts and work together when it mattered. The game had just become far more complicated. And Sarah realized that the next 48 hours would determine not just her future in the special operations community, but whether she could truly rise above the obstacles that had been placed in her path. Commander Rains had given her the opportunity Morrison always said she deserved. Now she had to prove she could seize it. Team 3 gathered in a small planning room after the initial briefing. The 7 members sat around a table covered with maps, intelligence reports, and photographs of the target area. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone aware of the history between Bellamy and Sarah? Wondering how it would affect the mission? Bellamy stood at the head of the table, his jaw tight as he looked over the materials. Sarah could see him wrestling with something internally, pride battling against the reality that he was responsible for leading this team to success. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "We have 48 hours to plan and execute this mission," he began. "The intelligence indicates the hostages are being held in a 3-story building in the center of the target area. Guard rotations suggest approximately 15 hostile forces, armed with automatic weapons and possibly explosives." He paused, his eyes moving around the table before settling on Sarah. For a moment, she thought he might exclude her from the planning process, relegating her to some minor role. But then, something unexpected happened.
Atch!
Shen, he said, and there was something different in his tone. Something that wasn't hostility or contempt. You've got the most advanced close-quarters combat training on this team. If you were planning this assault, how would you approach it? The room went silent. The other team members looked between Bellamy and Sarah, surprised by the question. Sarah took a moment to study the maps before responding, aware that this could be a trap, but also recognizing that Bellamy might actually be serious. The direct approach gets people killed, she said, leaning forward to trace routes on the map. If we hit the building head-on, we'll be in a bottleneck where their numbers advantage becomes overwhelming. We need to create chaos, divide their attention, and hit them from angles they're not expecting. She pointed to several locations on the map. There's a building adjacent to the target with roof access. If we can position a support element there, they can provide overwatch and suppressing fire when we initiate. Meanwhile, the main assault team approaches through this network of alleys, using the tight spaces to limit how many enemies can engage us at once. One of the other team members, a stocky recruit named Davis, shook his head. That's too complicated. Multiple moving parts mean more things can go wrong. As Sarah met his eyes steadily. Complex doesn't mean complicated if everyone knows their role and can adapt. The enemy expects us to take the simple approach because that's how most people think. We need to be smarter than they are. Bellamy was watching her carefully, and Sarah could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing his personal feelings against what would give the team the best chance of success. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we'll develop a plan along those lines, he decided. Chen, you'll be point on the assault team. Davis, you're with her. The rest of us will split between support and security elements. Over the next 24 hours, Team 3 refined their plan, walking through each phase of the operation until everyone could execute their role without hesitation. Sarah noticed a shift in the team dynamics as they worked. The focus on the mission began to override the personal conflicts. Even Bellamy, though clearly still uncomfortable working with her, started to treat her as a valuable asset rather than an obstacle. The exercise began at 0:30, the team moving through the darkness toward their insertion point. Sarah's senses were heightened, every sound and shadow registering with crystal clarity. Morrison had taught her to embrace this state, to let her training take over while maintaining awareness of the bigger picture. The support team broke off first, making their way to the overwatch position while the assault element continued toward the target building. Sarah led them through the narrow alleys, her movements silent and efficient. Behind her, Davis and the others followed. Trusting her navigation through the maze of structures, they reached their staging point without being detected, and Sarah signaled for the team to hold position. Through her night vision equipment, she could see guards posted at the entrances to the target building, exactly where the intelligence had predicted. But Sarah noticed something else, a pattern in how they moved that suggested there might be additional security that wasn't in the briefing materials. She keyed her radio. Lead, this is Point. I'm seeing irregular patrol patterns that don't match our intelligence. Recommend we hold for additional observation. There was a pause, then Bellamy's voice came through her earpiece. Negative Point. We're on a timeline. Proceed as planned. Sarah gritted her teeth. Going in without fully understanding the security situation violated every principle Morrison had taught her. But Bellamy was the team leader, and she had to trust his judgment, or the whole operation would fall apart. Copy, she replied. Signaling the team to move forward, they advanced toward the building's side entrance, and that's when everything went wrong. The door they were supposed to breach was not only locked but rigged with a noise trap that triggered the moment they touched it. Alarms blared through the night, and suddenly the building was alive with activity. Contact, Davis shouted as hostile forces began pouring from multiple exits. Sarah reacted on pure instinct, her body moving with the fluid efficiency of countless hours of training. She engaged the nearest threats, her movements precise and economical, each action designed to neutralize enemies while conserving ammunition and energy. The tight confines of the alley worked in her favor, just as she had predicted in the planning session. But more hostiles were coming, and the assault team was in danger of being overwhelmed. Sarah made a split-second decision that went against the planned operation, but aligned with everything Morrison had taught her about adapting to chaos. "Team, stack on me," she commanded, not waiting for Bellamy's approval. "We're going through them, not around them. Aggressive movement, stay tight." She charged forward, becoming the tip of a spear that drove through the confused hostile forces. Her strikes were devastating, using angles and timing to put enemies down without getting bogged down in extended fights. Davis and the others followed her lead, their trust in her skill overriding any hesitation about breaking from the plan. They fought their way into the building, clearing rooms with a speed and efficiency that surprised even Sarah. She could hear Morrison's voice in her head, coaching her through each decision, each movement. The building was a maze of corridors and doorways, but Sarah navigated it with confidence born from hundreds of similar drills. They found the hostages on the third floor, guarded by what should have been the final obstacle. But Sarah barely slowed down, her approach so sudden and overwhelming that the guards never had a chance to react effectively. Within seconds, the room was secure, and the hostages were being prepped for extraction. "Lead, this is Point," Sarah transmitted. "We have the packages." Requesting extraction support, Bellamy's voice came through, and for the first time, she heard something like respect in his tone. "Copy, Point. Support element is laying down suppressing fire. Bring them home." The extraction was a fighting retreat, the team moving through the building while under constant pressure from the hostile forces. But Sarah's aggressive tactics had thrown the enemy off balance, and they never regained their coordination. By the time Team 3 reached the extraction point, they had completed the mission with all hostages safe and no team casualties. As the sun rose over the training facility, Commander Rains assembled all the teams for the after-action review. Team 3 was called up first, and Rains went through their performance point by point. He noted the mistakes, the deviations from the plan, but he also highlighted the moments where quick thinking and superior skills had turned potential disaster into success. Then Rains did something unexpected. He asked Bellamy directly who made the call to assault through the enemy position rather than trying to withdraw and regroup. Bellamy hesitated for only a moment before answering honestly. "Lieutenant Chen, sir." She recognized that withdrawal would have resulted in casualties and made the tactical decision to attack. Rains nodded, then turned to Sarah. "That's a decision that requires not just skill, but the confidence to trust your training when everything is falling apart. I've seen operators with 10 years of experience freeze in similar situations." He paused, letting his words sink in. "James Morrison trained you well, Lieutenant. He'd be proud of what you accomplished here." The acknowledgement from Rains, in front of everyone, was more valuable than any official commendation. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders.
Hey.
The constant need to prove herself finally validated by someone whose opinion truly mattered in the special operations community. After the briefing, Bellamy approached her, and Sarah tensed, unsure what to expect. But when he spoke, there was no hostility in his voice, only a weary kind of resignation. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "I let my prejudices blind me to what you're capable of. Last night, you saved this team, and you did it with skills I don't have and probably never will. I can't take back what I did, but I can promise it won't happen again." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We're not friends, Bellamy. We don't have to be. But if we're going to serve in the same community, we need to be able to trust each other when it matters. Can you do that?" "Yeah," Bellamy said, and she believed him. "I can do that." In the weeks that followed, word spread through the Special Operations training pipeline about what had happened during the exercise. Sarah's performance became the standard that others were measured against, and the harassment that had plagued her earlier training stopped completely. She wasn't just accepted, she was respected as one of the most capable operators in her class. The official evaluation from Commander Rains recommended her for accelerated advancement in the Special Operations track, noting specifically her exceptional tactical acumen and combat skills that exceed standard expectations. It was the kind of endorsement that opened doors and created opportunities. 6 months later, Sarah received orders to report to a classified unit that specialized in higher-risk operations. As she packed her gear, she found herself thinking about Morrison, about everything he had taught her, and about how his faith in her abilities had made this all possible. She picked up her phone and called him, and when he answered, she could hear the smile in his voice even before he spoke. "I heard you made quite an impression," Morrison said. "Raines called me. Said you put on a clinic in close-quarters battle that reminded him of some of our operations back in the day." "I had a good teacher," Sarah replied, echoing what she had told Gunnery Sergeant Williams months earlier. "You had the potential," Morrison corrected. "I just helped you unlock it. But what you did with those skills, how you handled the pressure and the prejudice and the challenges, that was all you. That's who you are. Sarah, a warrior who doesn't quit, doesn't back down, and doesn't let anyone tell her what she's capable of achieving." As Sarah ended the call, she looked out at the base where she had fought so hard to prove herself. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But she had learned something valuable through all the struggles and confrontations. She didn't need anyone's permission to be who she was meant to be. She just needed to trust her training, believe in herself, and never stop fighting for what she knew was right. The Navy SEAL combat methods that Morrison had taught her were more than just physical techniques. They were a mindset, a way of approaching life's challenges with determination, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. And as Sarah Chen moved forward into the next chapter of her career, she carried those lessons with her, ready to face whatever missions and obstacles lay ahead.